Boys and girls, I'm Sandy Quinn. I'm president of the Richard Nixon Foundation. Thanks to all of you for coming, particularly the many youngsters that I see here. All of you have this airplane in your dreams that you'll have one to fly. All you have to do is ask your parents for Christmas. Tell them you want an Air Force One. And then tell them about the gift shop because we actually have models of it. I am wearing, because I know many of you are wondering, what this smart, handsome jacket that I have on is. This is a replica of the jacket worn on Air Force One. So we ordered a bunch of them. Coincidentally, they're available in the gift shop. Well, they are. And all credit cards are accepted, of course. But I think they're pretty good, and they're comfortable, particularly on a 85-degree day like it is today. But I'm doing it just for the thematic, the theme of this, which is to introduce you to our model of Air Force One, which is a 7-foot replica of the real plane that President Nixon flew. But before we get into remarks, and we have people including Ed Nixon, Frank Gannon, Dwight Chapin, who spent many trips on Air Force One. And the latter two traveled with him repeatedly, Dwight hundreds of times, everywhere, Russia, China, and other trips. And he's here to tell you about some of those experiences. But first, I'd like you to stand, and we'll have the presentation of the colors by the Sea Cadets of Huntington Beach. Now I'll ask Craig Young, the Vice Mayor of Yorba Linda, to give the Pledge of Allegiance, so please remain standing.
Thank you, Sandy. It's my honor to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Could I ask us to pause for just a second? Pledging allegiance, or promising our loyalty to these symbols. That means a whole lot more to me when I got to stand out front here a couple months ago as we celebrated the return of anniversary of the return of almost 200 of our prisoners of war. So let's not say these words lightly. Let's say them from the heart. Ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I have to tell you, I made a mistake, and I noticed their arms, so I want to correct it. They're not Huntington Beach, it's Seal Beach. Sorry, everybody. They're 16 and 17 years old, and they're all going into the Navy. They participate with us in our wreath lanes. They're a great bunch of kids, and I feel better about the future of our country and our military when I see kids like that. Thank you for coming. Now, in contrast to those youngsters, we have a man here who counseled Richard Nixon on running for Congress. His father was one of the first motivators of Richard Nixon thinking about running and then later winning. He was on our board of directors for years and years. He's a director emeritus now. And in June, he had his 100th birthday. Ladies and gentlemen, Hubert Perry. Hubert comes to all of our events. Thank you, Hubert. He wants to be a Sea Cadet, but I don't know about that. Do we still have, did Gary leave? Is Gary Milhouse still here? Right here. There, where is he? There, Gary, please come over here and stand. Here's Richard Nixon's cousin, Gary Milhouse. Yeah. Well, we got relatives everywhere, including the one I'm going to introduce now. Richard Nixon's younger brother lives in Seattle. He too comes to so many of our events. He's on our board of directors. We're forever grateful for all that he does for us. He was not born in that house that his brothers were on our grounds here, but he spent much of his youth tagging along with his older brother. including a great trip on our visit to Air Force One. So I've asked him to make some remarks and to unveil our airplane. Please say hello to the President's brother, Ed Nixon.
Wow, now that's a crowd for the reception area. This is regardless. I have to correct Standy on one thing, though. He gets most things right. But Dick was the only one born in that house. All the others were born elsewhere, including me. So that part is just fine. The birthplace house, probably most of you have seen it, was so well done in restoring it that I told them when I met the contractors, my dad would have been very angry to see what you've done to this house. They said, why? You spent too much money. It was just fine like it was. Anyway, what's behind me and what you're about to see is a model of an extraordinary Boeing 707-320, which was commonly used among international carriers, but the special ones that were with us that I have been on one time, and these other guys have been on many times, can tell you stories that are really remarkable. I really think I could tell you a lot of stories, but I told the children about one on how I got my first ride in one. My only ride was due to my daughter, Beth, who wrote a letter when Dick was elected. She was 8 years old. She said, "Dear Uncle Dick, I'm glad you were elected president. I'd like to come and live with you at the White House. Please write and tell me when I can come." I didn't know what was in that letter because her mother and I didn't know either. We didn't know she'd sent it. But apparently it floated around in the White House mailroom, and somebody recognized that must be Ed's daughter. So actually, it's 1971 by the time it got over to Rose Woods, and she showed it to my brother, and they were in San Clemente in early 1971, and I wondered what was this all about, because she says, "Your brother wants you to bring your family down to LAX. We'll pick you up, take you out to El Toro. We want you to see Air Force One." I said, "What for?" They're in school right now. I said, "No, we know. We've checked it out. They're in school in spring break. You bring them down here." So we made the trip, and I'll tell you the rest of that story, I think, when I have more time. I don't know how much time I have, but, you know, the ride on Air Force One is an experience that all of you would be curious about. Those of you who had done it many times know how extraordinary it is. It's different. Not like any other airliner. Everything's up front, except for a few seats in the back for the press, when that was appropriate too, I think. The youngsters wondered about it in a way that my daughter saw it as the White House. I mean, this is the president's home, and he's my uncle, and I want to go see it. Well, we promised them we'd take him to see the White House sometime, but a regular tour would be fine. But this was extraordinary. And Dwight Chapin could tell you what he saw coming up the ladder. Everybody else was on the plane. And if he says a few words, he can tell you what he showed me when we boarded that plane. At that, I should turn it over to who's next on our list here. Sandy, where's Sandy Quinn go? I think, Dwight, are you next? Sandy, is Dwight next here?
We're going to unveil.
We're going to unveil the plane.
I've got to unveil it. All right. Who's going to pull the cord? Here we go. Well, it looks like the real thing, but of course it's not. There'd be 140 feet and it won't get in here. But it is a 1/20th very precise scale model of Air Force One. And as you've posed for it or whatever, I think somebody got left out there. Well, she'll just have to write a letter to the president. With that, Sandy, you should wrap this up with some explanations for these folks, because they're all here for a very important reason. They want to see this thing up close, and up close is what it is. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you. Thank you. This, just a couple of interesting facts about this. This plane, 26,000, President Nixon's plane, was the first Air Force 747, the first United States aircraft dedicated exclusively to the President. And it is indeed a flying White House. As you'll hear from Dwight and Frank, how much the President worked on it. It is in the air what the White House in Washington is when they're on the ground and in residence. President Nixon flew 550,000 miles on this plane. It carried 8 presidents, and it's now on display in Illinois. It flew JFK after his assassination. It flew him back to Washington. And on board Air Force One, after President Kennedy was assassinated, President Johnson, then Vice President Lyndon Johnson, was sworn into office with Jackie Kennedy at his side. So historic it is indeed. Now I want you to hear from Frank Gannon, who was a White House Fellow. That's a very distinguished group of young people who are invited to work and study and learn and be mentored at the White House, and he was chosen because of his incredible academic record and his abilities. He later went on to be a presidential speechwriter, and he flew on this plane, as he'll tell you about many times, and then he accompanied President Nixon to San Clemente after the presidency and worked closely with him side by side as he did the memoirs, a point that President Nixon acknowledges in detail in his book. So please welcome Frank Gannon, Dr. Frank Gannon.
Thank you. Well, thank you. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here in the site of this replica of Air Force One. Sandy said I should speak for about an hour, so I thought I'd begin with a brief history of aviation. In 1900s, the Wright brothers, the presidential planes really began with FDR, who didn't like to fly, who was timid of flying, but because of the German submarines in the Atlantic, when he went to Europe for the wartime and North Africa for the wartime conferences, he had to fly. And his plane was known as the Sacred Cow. The press dubbed it the Sacred Cow. And actually, FDR's flying during the war gave a boost to commercial aviation, because people thought if it was safe for the president, or if the president was fly, it must be safe, and so that was sort of a boost to the beginnings of commercial aviation. Truman's plane, partly because he didn't want it to be known as Sacred Cow II, he called it Independence, the Independence, after his hometown. And it was originally, he designed it, he wanted it to look like an eagle. It was a prop plane, 2-engine prop plane, and he wanted it to look like an eagle. So the body was painted with feathers. It looked like they used black highlights to make it look like feathers. The windows were the eyes, and the nose was painted brown to be a beak, to look like a beak. And it actually, if you look at it, it's pretty cool. And very soon after, they changed the nose from brown to yellow because they didn't want the press to start calling it the brown nose, which would have. So even in those days, the press was always President Kennedy didn't name it, and that's when it became. That's by sort of default, it became known as Air Force One. And as Sandy said, this 2600 was the first Air Force One that was specifically dedicated to the use of the president and became sort of a flying White House, because the communications, the degree of communications at that time really required that the president be in touch, and he could be in touch all over the world at all time. Before then, and still today, any plane the president flies on becomes by definition Air Force One. And on that last flight out to San Clemente or out to El Toro, on August 9th, 39 years ago, 2 days ago, 1974, President Ford was sworn in at noon when we were about over St. Joseph, Missouri, and at that point, the captain, Ralph Abertazzi, radioed back that the call signals for the plane had changed, and it was that they would, that after this point, instead of being Air Force One, they would be 26,000. And same works with the vice presidential plane. Whatever its number is when the vice president is aboard, that's Air Force Two. Mrs. Kennedy chose, nowadays we think of this iconic color scheme, which was commissioned by Miss Jacqueline Kennedy, and she commissioned Raymond Loewy, who was a, L-O-E-W-I, who was a sort of the state-of-the-art graphic designer in the 40s and 50s and 60s. And he designed the Shell logo and the Exxon logo and the Coke dispensing machines and the U.S. Postal logo. At any rate, Loewy came up with this combination of two blues, the powder blue and the darker blue, and the line and the presidential seal, which is so, I mean, if you think about it now, it's so right. But that was actually designed by Raymond Loewy in 1962. And so 26,000 was the plane that was used, as Sandy said. It was the plane that brought President Kennedy's body back to Washington on November 22nd, 1963. It was the plane in the cabin, in the president's cabin there. There's photographs of President Johnson being sworn in, with Mrs. Kennedy standing next to him and Lady Bird Johnson. And the story there was that, of course, they had no idea that was going to happen. Oliver Stone to the contrary. So they didn't have a Bible. And so one of the people on the plane had a Roman Catholic missal. And so the President Johnson was sworn in on a missal because it was the only biblical type book aboard. President Johnson, as was his wont, each president can configure the interior. And President Johnson, his chairs always had to be higher than anyone visiting him. And so on Air Force One, he had one installed that had a hydraulic lift, as I understand it, so that he could be, however tall the person opposite was, he could be that much taller. It became known as the throne. And it was removed afterwards. The Nixon interior of 26,000, and after 1973, it became 27,000 because a duplicate plane was delivered, and so 26 and 27,000 were both presidential aircraft, and the interiors were the same. But the Nixon interior was very utilitarian. He really did use it as a flying White House. He loved, some people can sleep on planes. Nixon was a reader, and I think he enjoyed having several hours or a couple of hours in that kind of, that cocoon of isolation where he could really concentrate and go through books and work. And in the exhibits inside, there are several photographs of him in the Centennial exhibit, the new one that opened for his 100th birthday earlier this year in January. There's some pictures of him aboard Air Force One in his cabin with his yellow pad, writing with his feet up and writing on his yellow pad, and he did a lot of very drafting of speeches and things and position papers. And then Mrs. Nixon, so the Nixon plane, when you got on, there was you walked down a little corridor, and the president's cabin, which there could be made up a bed, there was a desk, there was the chair, and a bath. The First Lady had her cabin, and Mrs. Nixon would do the same thing. She would, on trips, she would have briefing books, and essentially their rooms were offices. The Nixons didn't sleep on it very much. So the rooms were offices. In the president's cabin, a conference table could be set up, although I don't think he used that very much. It was mainly people would come in and sit and chairs. And then there was a staff section. Dwight will tell you more about this, but there was a staff section, and then there was a small visitors section, which wasn't used. The President Johnson used to fly people a lot, and we were talking downstairs about whether we would despoil it or not. I was a despoiler. Johnson started the idea, he liked to have people fly aboard it. And so he would have souvenirs, and there would be, back in the days when people smoked, there would be these really distinguished, hard, white plastic, hard flip-top boxes, very distinguished with white, with the presidential seal, big presidential seal on them, and they would be at each place. And there would be playing cards, decks of playing cards with the legend, aboard Air Force One, and notepads, and all kinds of things, which, and crystal ashtrays that people would take, and glassware. As a matter of fact, there's some great artifacts that the Nixon, the National Archives put up today. I think they're new today, and it has some of the artifacts from the Nixon Air Force One, including the flight certificates. That Johnson started that if you flew aboard, you got a flight certificate afterwards saying that you flew aboard Air Force One as a guest of the President of the United States and the date. So I have a small library or a small museum of Air Force One artifacts, matchbooks and cigarette packs and ashtrays. And President Carter ended all that. He introduced plastic glasses, and so that's, at any rate, that last flight was very dramatic, intense, and sad, as you might imagine, because the small group of people that would be flying on Marine One, and of course we have Marine, now we have Air Force One, but we have the real Marine One out in the garden that President Nixon used. And the small group, Mrs. Nixon, Tricia, his daughter Tricia Nixon, and her husband, Ed Cox, and Ron Ziegler, who was the press secretary, and Jack Brennan, Colonel Jack Brennan, who many of you, if you've been around here, you've seen Jack. He's an active participant in the work of the library, who was the military, the Marine aide, were coming out from the East Room. The President said farewell to the staff in the East Room, got on Marine One, and flew to Andrews Air Force Base to board Air Force One. There were about 10 staff people, I think, and we weren't going to go on the chopper, so we had to drive out early. And so I got out to Andrews early and parked. Actually, that's not true. You wouldn't park because I wasn't coming back. I got an Air Force car, and you drive you out. Well, it was an Army car, but at any rate, a car. Well, since Seal Beach and Huntington Beach, I'm now at any rate, and boarded. And among the other people on that flight was Diane Sawyer, who had been an aide in the press office. And we sat in the president's cabin because there was a television set, a small television set in the president's cabin. And we sat in the president's cabin and watched the East Room speech there aboard Air Force One. And then we continued to watch the coverage where they left, and the famous pictures of walking down the red carpet with the Fords, and then the president standing up for that iconic photograph saying goodbye and waving, and getting into Marine One, and it's lifting off the South Lawn there. And it's about a 15-minute chopper ride. It's about a 45, 50-minute drive out to Andrews. So we're watching the coverage, and this is my most vivid recollection of that day. We're sitting there, and we're watching the television, and through my peripheral, and they say, now the President's Marine One is landed at or is getting ready to land at Andrews Air Force Base. We'll cut to there. And so we're watching on the television as Marine One starts coming down, and my peripheral vision out the window, I saw this plane, the chopper coming down. That was just made a great impression on me. At any rate, what I've managed to do is make this little talk about Air Force One all about me, which means I feel I've succeeded. And I've brought the whole room down by talking about this it's arguably one of its least happy flights. But I will say there were two things that, I mean, it was a thrilling experience to work for those 3 years in the White House. But one of it, for the first year, my office was in the second floor of the West Wing. And it was always thrilling each morning to take the bus down and get off at 17th in Pennsylvania and cross the street and walk down and go in the Northwest Gate and go to work by walking up that curving driveway and going into the West Wing with the Marine there. That never ceased to be thrilling. And the other thing, which I experienced much less frequently, was going out to Andrews, and driving in most cases myself, and parking and going into the building and going through some corridors and going down and suddenly emerging, and there on the tarmac in front of you was Air Force One. It is just its size, its everything about it was just a thrilling moment. So those memories mean a lot to me. The person who really can tell you about it, and is about to do it now, is Dwight Chapin, who was one of the earliest, one of the original Nixon people. Of course, he was 12 or 13. He was a teenager at the time. But in the mid-'60s, he was working in the Nixon law offices down at 20 Broad Street when Nixon was just formulating the plans to run in '68, beginning in about '66, I guess, '67, and then spending a lot of time at the Nixon's apartment up at 810 Fifth Avenue. And Dwight then was active in the campaign, at the convention, at the campaign, and then came into the White House as one of the most intimately placed aides, the innerest inner circle of 2 or 3 people, and Dwight was there. His office was right next to the Oval Office. And the title was Deputy Assistant to the President, which is impressive, but it doesn't sound as impressive as it really was in terms of proximity and the trust that President Nixon placed in Dwight. So it's and then Dwight, as he'll tell you, was on so many of these historic flights. So it's a pleasure and a privilege for me to introduce my friend and former colleague, Dwight Chapin.
Thanks, Frank. I should have just let him keep on going, shouldn't I? Working for President Nixon was a real privilege. I can remember when we were at the Pierre Hotel in New York and getting ready to go to the White House to take up the reins of leadership on January 20th of 1969. We had a briefing that was done by Senator Pat Moynihan and by a gentleman by the name of Bryce Harlow, who joined us in the White House and was in charge of congressional affairs. And Bryce had worked for President Eisenhower, and he said to all of us gathered in this little conference room, he said, "Never forget that what you're about to do is only temporary. You serve at the pleasure of the president, and you're only there for a fleeting moment of time. And you have a responsibility, and you have this honor that few men and or women will ever have of working in the White House." And I never forgot that. In fact, when I was being interviewed by the press a few weeks ago in regards to that movie, Our Nixon. They said, did you feel betrayed? And I said, never. I never felt betrayed. I worked there at the pleasure of the president. And I also got to ride on Air Force One at the pleasure of the president. And it was phenomenal. It was, Frank has said it, Sandy said it, this was a traveling office. We worked hard on that airplane. The president worked very hard on that airplane. If you come up here after this little ceremony, you'll see the pictures here of him with his briefcase on his lap, an image that just is fixed in my mind forever because I saw him that way on the airplane, I saw him that way in hotel rooms, and I saw him that way in the executive office building. He always had his yellow pad out, his pen, and was making notes. And for those people that are really interested in this, you can go into the National Archives down below here and probably put in a request and look at some of these yellow pads or see some of them in the exhibit. And the degree to which he thought things through, it makes an incredible impression on you. Well, on Air Force One, for example, I remember being called up, and we were on the way to China. And my role on that particular trip was I was the acting chief of protocol and was in charge of all of the logistical arrangements. Dr. Kissinger was in charge of the substance. I was in charge of how it all unfolded. And the president called me up into the office area that he had there that Frank described, and he had his yellow pad, and he was talking to me about the ceremony of what was going to happen when he arrived at the airport. Nothing earth-shaking other than the fact that in his mind he was working right through the whole trip, starting with exactly what would happen when he walked off that airplane, and he wanted to know every single detail about it. I remember one time when we were on the plane, and there was the presidential seating area or office area, and then right adjacent to it, behind a wall, was the staff area. In the staff area there were two tables. At one table was Bob Haldeman, who was the chief of staff, and his assistant Larry Higbee and myself. And at the other table was John Ehrlichman, the head of domestic affairs, Dr. Henry Kissinger, and who was the national security advisor at the time, and Ron Ziegler, who was press secretary. And I mean, often in my back, Bob and Larry looked toward the presidential cabin, and my back was to it. So often I would hear the voice before I saw the man. And I can remember the president's voice. All of a sudden he says, "Damn it, Henry," talking to Kissinger. He says, "Can't the CIA do anything right?" And it turned out that they had a discussion right there with the rest of us listening about the bombing reports and statistics that had come in from the CIA from the night before regarding the Vietnam War. But there, I mean, it was a very significant conversation and reaction, and, as a young man, having the privilege of being able to witness some of this and hearing some of this was phenomenal. We had a guest area on the airplane, and the name of the game, I was in charge of all of the scheduling and the appointments and the travel and, the arrangements of who came in to see him and so forth. And our guest area, the name of the game was to keep the number of guests to the minimum. We preferred no guests, or I should say the president preferred no guests. And that wasn't because he was antisocial or anything, but it goes back to that little thought that I gave you about how hard he worked. And if he was on the plane and there were guests, he knew he had to spend time with them. So we always worked to have minimal guests on there. He would indeed spend a half hour, 45 minutes, an hour, depending upon who the guest happened to be. If it was a senator, he might spend more time because he loved to talk politics with them. And we usually would have the senators or some of the congressmen on the plane if we were headed into their district. I remember that when the Apollo 13 astronauts got back safely, we went out to greet them in Hawaii. And we had on that journey with us Frank Borman, who was an astronaut. We had the head of NASA, and he spent considerable time with those individuals on the plane. I should also mention that in the staff area, where we were, there were two IBM Electrics typewriters, and we always had two White House secretaries with us. That would rotate as to whose secretary it would be and so forth, but they were there to do transcriptions and to take care of any of the paper flow that would come in through our fax machine. Fax machines were brand new then. Our fax machine, which was one of the most advanced that would have existed at the time, if a fax was coming in and the plane banked to the right, the left-hand side of the page would seem to disappear, and the right-hand side would seem to get darker. And then as the plane leveled out, you would start getting, I mean, back then, you know, no cell phones like we have now, no email. I mean, it just was an entirely different world. The secretaries typed everything with carbon and had carbon paper. I mean, talk about archaic by today's standard. Up here you're going to see one of the most famous pictures of Air Force One, in my opinion, other than the Kennedy assassination picture, and that is the picture of President Nixon being greeted by Prime Minister Zhou Enlai when he landed in February of 1972 in Beijing. And the plane figures very prominently in that picture, and it's very symbolic of this flying institution called Air Force One and the significance to our nation of that particular airplane. Because anywhere in the world that we went, and we went everywhere, we did not go everywhere. We did not get down into South America. But everywhere else that we went, when that plane flew into a foreign country, it made a statement. And it made a statement about this country and about who was on it. And without any exaggeration or hyperbole or whatever, it was the United States of America, and it was the President of the United States. So I think that gives you a little bit of flavor for the plane, and hopefully for President Nixon, who was an incredibly special man and whose greatness is going to be growing and recognized by future generations. Thank you.
Thank you, Dwight. We owe this plane to the donor who gave it to us, and I want you to thank him. He's a longtime docent here, a good friend of ours, Bill Gish. Where's Bill? Right there. Please stand. Thank you, Bill. Thank you for all you do. It was his idea. He wanted to hang it from up there and propel it, so it went to, and we said we didn't want everybody looking at the belly of it. We want them to look straight on. So, Bill, thank you. Thank you. Also, the folks that made it are from Pacman, which is a Fullerton-based manufacturing company. I visited it. It's an amazing place. They make models for all the airlines, for the airplane manufacturers, and for the military. So from Pacman today, Fred Unveiling, where's Fred? William Tu, and Anthony Sostarsik. Thanks to you guys for your amazing work. I want to thank Tu, our acting director from the National Archives and Records Administration. We share this house with the federal government. And when they heard that we were doing this, they put together this very impressive exhibit over here in the glass case, which I want all of you to go look at, because it has the actual jacket that the president wore. It has playing cards. The president never used those. The press used those, wasting their time, as they, of course, did. It has the certificate that declared it as the Spirit of '76, and a number of other things. So go look at it, because it's kind of interesting memorabilia. Mike, thank you for putting it together. Please stand. Mike Dugan from... Then, I want to thank Ed Nixon for coming and Craig Young for your constant support here. Thank you, sir. And Frank and Dwight. And it's time to retire the colors. You guys still awake? Why aren't you home doing homework? All right, then let us retire the colors. Aren't they great? Let's give them a hand. Now, what we're going to do is invite all of you who would like to have your pictures taken, if you have a camera, of course, to queue up here starting to your left and just come through the queue line and you can have pictures taken. I thank all of you for coming. I hope you enjoy your experiences every time you come. God bless America and God bless you. Thank you.